There is a photograph that was never supposed to exist. It sits in a locked drawer inside a palace that overlooks the Red Sea, pressed between two pages of a Quran that belonged to a dead woman. The photograph shows a man and a woman sitting on the floor of an industrial kitchen at 3 in the morning, sharing a plate of scrambled eggs cooked with too much cardamom. She is laughing. He is looking at her like someone who has just realized he's drowning and has decided not to swim. The man in that photograph controls a sovereign wealth fund worth $400 billion. The woman was sent to kill everything he'd ever built. And the scrambled eggs? The scrambled eggs were her idea. Let me take you back. But before them, I want you to me in the comment where exactly in the world you are watching from and what time of the day it is in that location. Prince Faisal bin Abdulrahman al-Rashid was 34 years old and already the loneliest man in a country of 35 million people. Not lonely the way poets mean it. Lonely the way a man becomes when every room he enters has been pre-swept for threats, every conversation he hears has been rehearsed, and every woman who has ever touched his hand did so with a contract somewhere in her peripheral vision. He had 11 cars. He had a yacht named after his mother. He had 3 phones, each one monitored by a different security team, and on none of them did he have a single contact he could call at midnight just to say, "I had a terrible dream." But here's what made Faisal strange. What made him a contradiction that his own family couldn't solve. Every Thursday night, after the diplomatic dinners and the board meetings conducted in English he'd perfected at Cambridge, he would dismiss his entire household staff, lock himself in the service kitchen of his Jeddah compound, and cook. Not the way billionaires cook. No private chef standing nearby. No imported Wagyu flown in from Kobe. Faisal cooked the way his mother had before cancer ate her down to 87 pounds. Lamb shoulder with dried lime. Rice with the crust burned exactly right. The way she'd taught him at 9 years old, her hands over his on the wooden spoon. He cooked in bare feet on cold marble with a $20 non-stick pan from a Riyadh grocery store that his head of security once tried to replace with a Le Creuset. Faisal looked at the man and said very quietly, "Touch that pan and I will find a new head of security." That head of security was Colonel Tariq Nasser. Remember that name. Tariq had been with the family for 22 years, recruited from Jordanian intelligence, sharp as a scalpel, loyal in the way that only men who have been saved from something can be loyal. Faisal's father had pulled Tariq out of a prison in Amman after a politically motivated arrest in the 90s, gave him a new identity, a salary, a purpose. Tariq would have swallowed a bullet for the al-Rashid family. Everyone knew that, which is exactly why no one, not the intelligence directorate, not the Palace Advisory Council, not Faisal himself, ever thought to look closely at Tariq's daughter. Her name was Nora Nasser, 26. A linguistics graduate from the American University of Beirut who spoke 4 languages and had the kind of face that made you forget what you were about to say. Not beautiful the way magazine covers demand, not symmetrical, not polished. Her nose had been broken once, badly, in a car accident in Amman when she was 17. It healed slightly crooked, and it gave her face a quality that was almost argumentative, like her bones themselves were pushing back against something. She arrived at the compound in March, during the season when the Red Sea humidity turns the air into something you wear rather than breathe. Her father had arranged it. She would work as an administrative coordinator for the household. Scheduling, logistics, the invisible architecture that keeps a royal residence from collapsing into chaos. It was a reasonable cover. It was also a lie, not Tariq's lie. Tariq believed every word his daughter told him. He believed she wanted to be closer to family. He believed she was tired of Beirut. He believed her when she kissed his cheek at the airport and said, "I missed you, Baba." The lie belonged to a man Nora had met 14 months earlier in a cafe in Hamra, Beirut. A man who introduced himself as a doctoral researcher studying Gulf economic policy and who over the course of 7 months took apart Nora's entire sense of self and rebuilt it around a single idea: that the al-Rashid family was a cancer in the region, that Faisal specifically was funding operations that had destroyed communities she'd never even heard of, and that she, with her access, her languages, her father's position, was the only person who could get close enough to document the proof that would bring him down. His real name was Dariush Gorbani, Iranian intelligence, patient the way only ideologues can be patient. Nora didn't know she was a spy. Not really. She believed she was an activist. She believed she was doing something righteous. She carried a modified phone with a secondary operating system that mirrored itself to a server in Tehran every 6 hours. And she thought she was sending information to an independent journalist collective. That's the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you. The most effective traitors are almost never cynical. They are believers. They are people so hungry for a cause that they'll swallow the hook without ever tasting the metal. So Nora walked into Faisal's compound carrying a prayer in one hand and a detonation device in the other. And she didn't know which was which. The first 3 weeks were nothing. She was furniture. She organized schedules, managed vendor logistics, handled the catering contracts for a diplomatic reception that Faisal didn't want to attend. He passed her in hallways. She was Colonel Nasser's daughter, which made her protected and invisible in equal measure. Faisal nodded at her the way you nod at someone whose face you recognize, but whose name you've already let go of. Then came the Thursday that changed the geometry of everything. Nora couldn't sleep. The humidity was a living thing, pressing against the walls. And in her room, a guest suite in the eastern wing, had an air conditioning unit that rattled like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. She gave up at 2 in the morning, wrapped herself in a cotton robe, and went looking for the kitchen to make tea. She found Faisal instead. He was standing at the stove barefoot, wearing a Cambridge rowing t-shirt that had been washed so many times the letters were ghosts. He was stirring eggs in that cheap pan, and there was a song playing from his phone, Kultum, the long version of Alf Layla wa Layla, the one that stretches for almost an hour because the audience kept demanding encores. He didn't hear Nora come in. She stood in the doorway for 11 seconds. She counted later, and then when she replayed the moment, watching a man worth more than some countries scramble eggs alone in a dark kitchen while a dead woman sang about love. She could have left. She should have. Her training, her conditioning, though she wouldn't have called it that, told her to observe, catalog, retreat, report. Instead, she said the most human thing possible. "You're going to overcook those." He turned. No one had spoken to Faisal without honorifics in years. No one had criticized his cooking ever. "Excuse me? The eggs. Your heat's too high. They'll go rubbery." Faisal looked at her, then at the eggs, then back at her. "They're my egg," he said. "They're everyone's eggs," Nora said. "Overcooked eggs are a universal tragedy." He almost smiled. Almost. What he actually did was more dangerous. He moved aside and handed her the spoon. She lowered the flame, added cardamom from a jar on the counter, killed the heat 30 seconds before he would have. They ate sitting on the floor because every chair in that kitchen was pushed against the wall for cleaning, and neither of them moved to pull one out. I want you to think about something. If you found out that someone who made you feel seen for the first time in years had been placed in your life on purpose, would that erase what the moment felt like? Or would it make it worse? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely don't know the answer. And I don't think this story knows either. It became a ritual without either of them naming it. Thursdays, the kitchen, never planned, never acknowledged in daylight. During the day, Nora was Colonel Nasser's daughter, the administrative coordinator, efficient and unremarkable. She organized Faisal's calendar through his chief of staff. She managed the household ledger. She was doing her job, both of them. Every 6 hours, her phone mirrored itself. She photographed documents when she could, scheduling patterns, security rotation logs, names of visitors who arrived through the private entrance and were never logged. She told herself these were proof of corruption, She told herself she was building a case, but Thursdays complicated everything. Because Faisal, the target, the cancer, the man she was supposed to expose, turned out to be someone who kept a worn copy of Mahmoud Darwish's poetry on top of the refrigerator. Someone who asked her about her mother, who had died when Nora was 12, and then sat in the silence after she answered without trying to fill it with comfort. Someone who told her, on the fourth Thursday, that he hadn't chosen this life the way people assumed. "They think I picked this from a catalog," he said, gesturing at the marble walls. "I was born inside the catalog. Nobody asks the product if it wants to be sold." Nora reported none of this. She told herself it wasn't relevant intelligence. She knew it was something else. By the second month, Darish's messages became more urgent. He needed specifics, account numbers, the identity of a particular arms contact Faisal allegedly maintained through a shell company in Dubai. Nora pushed back gently. She needed more time, more access. Darius pushed harder. "You're losing focus," he wrote. "Nora, remember what they are." The problem was that Nora was beginning to see what Faisal was. Not the dossier version, the real one. A man trapped inside a machine he couldn't shut off, trying to preserve his mother's memory through the ritual of cooking eggs at 2 in the morning, quietly funding girls' education programs in the South through a foundation that bore no royal name because he didn't want the publicity. She found that last detail by accident, buried in a financial routing she was photographing for Tehran. She stared at it for a long time. Then she photographed it anyway. That was the moment the fracture began, not when she fell in love. That had been happening since the cardamom. The fracture was the moment she sent evidence of his goodness to people who would only ever use it to map his vulnerabilities. The sixth Thursday. I'd rain in Jeddah, which happens so rarely it feels biblical. The whole compound smelled like wet stone and jasmine. Faisal was already in the kitchen when she arrived, but he wasn't cooking. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the cabinet, holding his phone with both hands. 2 hands, not one, the way you hold something when you need it to anchor you. Reading a message. "My cousin is trying to remove me from the investment council," he said without looking up. "He's been building the votes for months." Nora sat beside him, close, closer than protocol, close enough that her shoulder pressed against his, and neither of them moved away. "What happens if he succeeds? I become decorative, a portrait on a wall, smiled at, never consulted. Would that be so terrible?" He turned his head, where their faces were close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, could see the exact point where exhaustion had drawn a faint line beneath his left eye that didn't exist beneath his right. "It would mean everything my mother believed I could be was wrong." Nora felt something collapse inside her chest. Not break, collapse, like a building that had been structurally unsound for months and had just encountered the vibration it couldn't absorb. She kissed him, or he kissed her. Later, when the wreckage was being sorted, this distinction would matter to different people for different reasons. What is certain is that on the floor of that kitchen, with rain hammering the skylight and Kulthum silent for once, 2 people who had no business touching each other dissolved the distance between them, and every lie Nora had ever told became a living thing with weight and teeth. Now here is where you need to reconsider everything I've told you. Tariq, Colonel Tariq Nasser, 22 years of loyalty, a man who would swallow a bullet for the family he had known for 5 weeks. Not about the kiss, about the phone, about Tehran, about all of it. Tariq had spent 3 decades in intelligence work. He noticed things. A phone that ran warm when it should have been idle. His daughter's sleep patterns changing. Not the insomnia of romance, but the insomnia of guilt, which has a different architecture entirely. He'd cloned her device during a family dinner when she left it on the table to help clear plates. It took him an evening to find the mirror. 2 days to trace the server. 1 phone call to a former colleague in Amman to confirm what the server meant. His daughter was an asset of Iranian intelligence, deployed against the family that had saved his life. And Tariq said nothing. If this story is pulling something out of you, if you're feeling the weight of what Tariq is carrying right now, the impossibility of his position, then you're in the right place. This channel is where stories don't just entertain you, they sit with you at 3 in the morning. Subscribe because the ones coming next will do the same. Tariq said nothing because he was doing something, quietly, methodically, with the patience of a man who had survived an Amman prison cell by counting the bricks in the wall until he knew their number better than his own heartbeat. Tariq was building a third path. Not loyalty to the prince, not protection of his daughter, something that might, if he was precise enough, if the world was merciful enough, save both. He began feeding Nora's phone, not disinformation, nothing that would trigger Tehran's verification protocols. Real information, but sculpted. Security details that were accurate, but already scheduled for rotation. Financial documents that were genuine, but led to accounts that Tariq had already quietly insulated. He was giving Tehran exactly enough truth to keep them satisfied while building a firewall around everything that actually mattered. It was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done, not because of the operational risk, though that was severe, because every morning he sat across from his daughter at breakfast and watched her pour coffee with hands that didn't shake, and he had to pretend he didn't know that the steadiness was practiced, because he loved her in the way that only a father who missed her childhood can love a grown daughter, with the desperate, backward-reaching tenderness of a man trying to make up for every school play he didn't attend, every nightmare he wasn't there to interrupt. The crisis arrived not on a Thursday, but on a Sunday, a mundane day. The worst things always happen on days that don't feel important enough to hold them. Nora received a message from Darius that was different in tone from every message before it. No pressure, no urgency, just a photograph. Faisal entering a private medical clinic in Geneva 3 months prior. A visit Nora knew nothing about. A visit that wasn't in any file she'd accessed. Below the photograph, in one line, "We have sources you don't know about. Remember that." The message wasn't intelligence. It was a collar being tightened. Darius was reminding her that she was not a partner. She was a tool, and tools don't get to develop feelings for the machinery they're dismantling. Nora locked herself in her bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, stared at the tile, white with a thin green vine pattern, Portuguese imported, and understood for the first time the full shape of what she was standing inside. She loved Faisal. That was no longer deniable. She was destroying Faisal. That had never stopped being true. And somewhere between those two facts was a version of herself she could not find. The following Thursday, Faisal told her he wanted her to come to Geneva with him, openly, not as staff, as someone he was choosing. He'd spoken to advisors. There would be consequences. Political, familial, social. He didn't care. "I have spent my entire life being appropriate," he said. "I want to be real. Once. With you." Nora excused herself, walked to the courtyard, stood in the heat until her cotton blouse stuck to her back and the sweat traced lines down her ribs like the map of a country she didn't recognize. Then she went to her father's office. She didn't confess. She didn't have to. She walked in, and Tariq looked at her from behind his desk. A desk that had no personal items on it, not a single photograph, because Tariq had never trusted permanence. And he said, "Sit down, Nora." The conversation lasted 40 minutes. I won't tell you all of it because some of it belongs only to them. But I will tell you this. There was a moment when Tariq slid her mirrored phone across the desk, and Nora looked at it and looked at her father, and the sound she made was not crying. It was something before crying, something more structural, like the sound of a foundation shifting. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough to be angry, long enough to stop being angry, long enough to start being afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd make me choose between you and him, and that I'd choose you, and that it would be the wrong choice, and that I'd make it anyway." Tariq's plan was already in motion. He had documented everything. Dariush's recruitment chain, the server architecture, the precise calibration of his own counterintelligence operation. He had prepared two dossiers, one for the prince, one for Nora. The first would save the kingdom, the second would save his daughter. He could deliver both, but only if Nora did something that would cost her everything she had left. She would have to tell Faisal herself, not a confession extracted under interrogation, not evidence presented by security services. She would have to stand in front of the man she loved and say, "I was sent here to destroy you. I fell in love with you instead. And I am telling you now because my father could have exposed me and chose to give me the chance to expose myself." Faisal's reaction was not what anyone predicted. He didn't rage. He didn't go cold. He asked her to repeat herself. She did. He asked her a third time. She did again, her voice flattening with each repetition because each time the words meant something slightly different. The way a prayer changes when you say it enough times to stop performing it and start meaning it. Then Faisal stood up, walked to the kitchen, and turned on the stove. Nora followed him, found him standing over the cheap pan, cracking eggs with one hand, the other braced against the counter as if the marble was the only honest thing left in the building. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked, not turning around. "I'm telling you now. Now is late. Now is all I have." He cooked the eggs, overcooked them this time. Neither of them mentioned it. They sat on the floor and didn't eat, and the silence between them was the specific silence of two people who both know and won't say, except they'd already said it, and the silence was what was left after the saying. Faisal made 3 decisions that week. First, he authorized Tariq to transmit the intelligence dossier through back channels that would dismantle Darish's network without public exposure, not to protect Iran from embarrassment, but to protect Nora from becoming a headline. Second, he restructured his security apparatus so that the vulnerabilities Nora had documented were sealed, every single one. And he did this without firing Tariq because he understood something most powerful men never learn, that loyalty tested and proven is worth more than loyalty assumed. Third, and this is the one that cost him, he went to his cousin, the one trying to remove him from the council, and offered a concession, a significant one, in exchange for silence about a security breach that, if made public, would have weakened the family's standing for a generation. The cousin accepted. Of course he did. Power always accepts payment. And Nora? Nora left the compound on a morning in November when the Red Sea was the color of steel. She didn't say goodbye to Faisal because he asked her not to. "If you say goodbye," he told her, "I'll ask you to stay. And if I ask you to stay, you will. And if you stay because I asked, I'll never know if you chose me." She flew to Ammon, lived with a distant aunt, enrolled in a graduate program in conflict resolution, which is either the most ironic or the most honest thing a person with her history could study. She changed her phone number, kept the old phone, wiped in a drawer, threw away every piece of clothing she'd worn in that compound, except one cotton robe that smelled like cardamom for weeks after she left, and then didn't. And then did again one night when she held it to her face and realized the smell was coming from her own memory. 14 months later, she received a package. No return address. Inside, a cheap non-stick pan, identical to the one in the kitchen, and a note in Faisal's handwriting. It's just 4 words. The heat was right. She called the old number. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been carrying the phone, which meant he'd been waiting, which meant that a man who controlled $400 billion had been organized entirely around the possibility of a sound. I don't know what they said. That part of the story is locked in the same drawer as the photograph, pressed between the same pages, guarded by the same silence. I know that she went back. I know that when she arrived, Tariq was standing at the gate, and he didn't say a word, just opened it, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had carried an impossible weight for so long that the moment it lifted, he didn't feel lighter. He felt the bruise. I know that the photograph was taken that night. The kitchen, the floor, the eggs, the laughter, her face, his face. Now, step away from them. Step away from the palace and the Red Sea and the compound and the intelligence networks. Come back to your own kitchen, your own floor, your own 2 a.m. You have been someone's mystery. You have been looked at across a room by someone who didn't know whether to trust you. You have held a version of yourself that you were afraid to show because showing it meant risking the only thing that mattered. Every single person listening to this has stood at a stove or a counter or a window. Yanan felt the full weight of being known, truly known, and understood that being known is the most terrifying form of intimacy because it means someone can see exactly where to hurt you and they're choosing not to. Love is not the absence of betrayal. Love is what two people build in the rubble after the betrayal has been excavated and every bone has been named. If this story made you hold your breath at any point, if you felt that kitchen floor under you, share it with one person who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because the next story on this channel is about a woman who received a voicemail from someone who'd been dead for 3 years. And it's going to keep you up tonight. Some doors open from both sides. The brave ones knock anyway.